This session is from Commvault and HPE. My name's Nigel Tozer. I look after solutions architecture for EMEA at the director level. And today I'm going to be covering off some of my own experience and also delivering some value in the form of some figures and stats that I've put together from various analysts. I'd like to introduce Chris from HPE. Well, you introduce yourself, Chris.
Thank you very much. So, Chris White, and I'm the worldwide director for our consumption offer, which is called GreenLake. So, responsible for the growth curve to maintain and obviously working hand in glove with our partners to offer solutions out to the market right now.
Thank you. So, I know it's a rather grand and scary title. It's not going to be very scary. There aren't really four horsemen and there's no horses involved or indeed been hurt in the preparation of this presentation. Before we go into this, I think it'd be useful to just explain a little bit more about our relationship. So HPE GreenLake uses Commvault technology and for us that's a consumption model that some of our customers prefer over buying a software or appliance from us. So that's kind of the relationship that HPE and Commvault have in this respect. The session today, we're going to look at the importance of data. Then we're going to look at kind of translating what the four horsemen, the people that are potentially going to damage your relationship with data. And then we've got some advice, I guess, on how you can get around some of these challenges. And Chris is going to go through a little bit about background on what he's doing and also cover off some real user examples of digital transformation that hopefully will inspire you to do some things in your own environments. So first of all, I thought it would be really good to refocus on the importance of data in our world today. And when you look at we've got a slight reflow in there. It's governance, innovation, agility, cost control, and service continuity. But what happens is data really is at the center of all of these now. Now, most of us actually do reasonably well on service continuity for our core applications. And after that, once you get outside of that, it varies a little bit organization by organization. But when you start to look at things like executing on data, when it comes to things like governance, when it comes to things like cost control, then generally business and organizations, even the public sector, tend to fare less well then. Their ability to execute and keep costs under control with data, get governance, and I've got some kind of interesting stats on the governance side of things that we'll take a look at later on. And then you've got things like innovation and agility, so where it comes to agility, data can be something that's really useful, but it can also present itself as an anchor to doing some of the things, some of the innovation that you'd probably like to do. And from an innovation perspective, generally it's using data from different sources, and unfortunately what we're seeing a lot of the time in today's world is that data is a little bit too disparate and filled out with stuff that's not really useful, and it makes it harder to get that innovation to work for you. So data, really is very critical. Now, the first horseman that we're going to cover is the one of famine. And really what we're talking about in terms of famine is the budgets. Okay, so from an IT perspective, budgets are critical for us to do the things that we really want to do. And when you start to look at what's impacting that, well, the shenanigans over the road today in Parliament and the uncertainty around Brexit has obviously harmed things. But we're also seeing, consumption models change. So getting money for big capital projects is much harder than it used to be. People now want to consume as they go, so the OPEX models seem to be more preferable. But that doesn't always allow you to do what you need to do in some cases. And actually we're seeing some companies and organisations now shifting or pulling back out of the cloud because they found it to be more expensive. Now, we're not saying that cloud's not the right thing, but you need to use it in the right places for that OPEX model to really work. We also see IT budgets being fragmented. Lines of business now are buying their own SaaS solutions to do things, and that's moving it away from IT. And then the two at the bottom are kind of, again, go hand in hand. Complexity around modern IT is much greater than it used to be. Some of the analysts are saying up to 60 or 70% of organisations now are reporting back to say that it's more complicated than it was even 2 years ago. And things like cloud, SaaS, and all the consumption models actually feed into that. And then, of course, with GDPR and other things around those areas, the regulatory burden is getting higher too. And if you happen to be a global organisation, it's not just GDPR, there's all kinds of breach and personal data regulations now all around the world. So I've got a number of analyst sources to just go through. So we are in a bit of a grey area at the moment because the spending predictions for 2019 aren't out yet because people aren't setting their budgets just yet. And we don't have the figures to say what the actual spending for 2018 was. So we are kind of stuck with last year's predictions about this year. So they're about as accurate as we can get. Now, when you look at this, this piece from Gartner, what they're saying, this isn't ranked in absolute spending numbers. This is ranked by the percentage that said that they were going to spend in those places. And as you can see, there's a massive reduction in capital expenditure in data centres. And a lot of that is actually shifting towards cloud services, cyber security and so on. But as you can see, it tends to be more cloud-based and SaaS or OpEx-based consumption models that are kind of winning out. Now, just make a note of the cyber security piece there. That's kind of interesting. Also, the BI and analytics, because using data more effectively is something that you'll see throughout this presentation. That all of these things really are interlinked. Now, these numbers are from the Enterprise Strategy Group, and they've got a different spending figure for those planning on, well, this is an absolute number. So this is the amount of people that said that they were going to improve cyber security. And as you can see, they're also spending money to reduce costs. That data analytics and BI shows up there again. But what's kind of interesting, in 2017, we had a large number of hits of things like ransomware, which is another one of the four horsemen, which I'll get onto later on. But what we're seeing is there's quite a big gap between this kind of spending up here and actually things like disaster recovery and programs to put in remediation when things do go wrong if you suffer some sort of data loss event that's security related. So again, interesting figures, I think you'll agree. Now, there is another kind of threat on the cost area, and it's this one of information governance. So again, sorry, this has reflowed slightly, but I'm going to go through these figures shortly, but these numbers from IDC, this is again a study from 2017 looking at where we're going to be by 2025. And what they're saying is there's enterprise data is going to grow, and it's going to become the largest data set. So it's going to overtake things that we find in the wider world. Data is going to become real-time and more interactive, so there's going to be a higher volume and velocity of data than we've ever had to deal with before. And more of that data will be captured from more sensors, IoT, those kind of things. And of course, we're going to use more and more machine technologies to analyze that data. That means that's going to present a whole different group of challenges for things like governance and the morals around how we deal with all of those things. Now, complexity is another issue that we brought up around budgets. When you're dealing with complexity, you always push up costs. It takes more management. You've got more disparate silos and so on to deal with. And actually, these numbers are again from IDC, and they say the biggest area around complexity is data. And the problem with data is it's distributed in so many places these days. And especially with unstructured data, which is very democratized, and it's down to individuals on how they manage it. They're kind of told to, and what they should do. Whether they do that is open for debate. And then the number of endpoints and users is growing. The number of mobile devices is making more things complicated, as is hybrid models and the sheer number of applications now. As a company ourselves, we consume SaaS applications, and over the last couple of years, we've got more of those into our business probably than we ever have before. And that leads to some complexity problems. And then, of course, the other challenge you've got with costs and governance is where people are today. If you look at this first number, where do you think you are in terms of maturity with information governance? Nearly half said they were in an extremely poor or poor state. And actually, the next one down, this how would you describe governance of files? 24% said chaotic. Now, I kind of think that's like, you know, when the doctor asks you how much you drink and you say 3 to 4 units, right? I think the same sort of thing is going on there. And then, of course, things just don't get deleted, which is problematic, particularly with things, privacy regulations. If you look at most data, it's like a coin, right? On one side, you've got value. On the other side, you've got risk. The value side will go up and down. That risk side, if it's personal data, remains constant. And in a lot of cases, the only safe thing that you should do is actually remove that data and delete it. But people just don't do that. So that looks at some of the areas around cost that's really affecting us. The next piece really is around the disruption that we're all experiencing. So you look at a lot of things that we have today just weren't around 3 or 4 years ago. And there's been some quite big changes in this area. So you take speakers, for example. You know, the rise of Google, Alexa, and all of these different things is really quite, you know, changed that market, and that's rising hugely, and it's having a knock-on effect in other places. But when you start to look at, you know, traditional companies that have got, you know, older legacy systems versus new entrants that have got none of this baggage, it actually makes it much easier for them to act on the data that they have. They're able to collect and look at new sources of data in a much more agile way than some of the bigger, older companies. Convergence also helps. So, you know, you as organizations might have 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 or 7 suppliers in one kind of process flow, whereas some of the newer startups can just do all of those things with one monthly fee, and that makes them more agile too, makes them easier to change. And then, of course, there's new approaches. So legacy companies, you know, probably haven't embraced things like social and crowdsourcing. You know, everybody puts up Uber and a bunch of other companies as examples of this. But, you know, take people like Zopper. They don't have any money. They take all of their cash from people who want to get savings, and they lend that back out again. So that makes, that actually changes the dynamic in a lot of these places. And a lot of it is down to data once again. So data is quite fundamental in this particular area. And now I mentioned before about this 2025 predictions piece from IDC. And it's kind of scary, the numbers. So the amount of enterprise data is going to double by 2025 to 60% of all the data that exists. And a lot of this is actually down to taking copies to build data warehouses and those kind of things, and because of some of the other things that are going on. So, you know, these real-time data collections, and a lot of this is coming from IoT. And actually IoT, whilst a lot of it is real-time, you do have to retain baselines so that you can look at things, you know, back in time to see how you were doing things and how you can improve or measure an improvement. So some of this data is retained too. This interactions piece is kind of interesting. We're moving now from a world where, you know, we would look at our phone or sit at a computer and call some data down. So it's a conscious connection when we want to see something, to now interactions being unconscious. We've got watches, phones, collecting medical data, location, a bunch of different things. So now our interactions with corporations has gone up massively, and it's going to increase even more over the next few years. And then you've got this notion of hypercritical data. So once again, if you look at most organizations today, probably 20 to 30% of their data is locked up in applications. Those critical applications will be really well protected, really quite resilient, and that's going to grow. The amount of data that's critical in that way is going to end up as being half the data that you deal with. So once again, you think about how many things now rely on machine learning and other things and AI that people will call on instantly. If that's your business and that doesn't work, that's problematic for you. And then this final piece, again, relates to this AI, and it's this area of, you know, more data is going to be analysed by machines rather than us looking at it, and that's going to be served back out for value, new business models, and leading to some of that innovation. So if, you know, this, I know it's called it very grand with this notion of war, but you do kind of have to plan to change. And once again, data is going to be central to that. And one of the big challenges, once again, that we've had over the last few years is the rise of ransomware. this ransomware as a service where you can go on the dark web, get basically a kit, and then target somebody. And we've gone from this notion of these blanket attacks in 2017, where people were genuinely just spamming stuff and getting lucky in some cases and targeting everybody, personal individuals and businesses, through to this point now where we've got to something like 91% of breaches and malware attacks start with a spear phishing event. So they're using social media and other ways to investigate a business, find out who to target, targeting the right people with some really credible stuff. I mean, I got caught. I did an event like this earlier in the year, and so there was a photographer there, and they said, "I'll send you the pictures tomorrow." And literally next day, I got an email said, "Here's the pictures from yesterday's event." I opened it, and it was one of these phishing things from my own companies, and a big thing come up on my screen saying, "You've been phished," right? And I'm so careful. I was really, really annoyed, actually. But it just goes to show how even the most careful of us can actually get caught out. And of course, what's happened now, we've got nation states getting involved. Some of the exploits that they're using are now trickling down into these cyber criminal enterprises. And they are really quite sophisticated. So I think June time this year, some of you may be aware that the city of Atlanta got hit by a SamSam infection, ransomware. And they had a ransom posted on them of $52,000 in Bitcoin. So that's not a lot of cash, right? Now, nobody advocates paying that, but it took them down, and they spent $2.6 million in contracts to backfill the services that they couldn't supply because their systems were taken out. Now, that's a public body, and the FBI and the likes wouldn't allow them to pay the ransom, but it still took them weeks to get fully back online. They lost a ton of video evidence in court cases and so on. So it's really important. There's another one, a shipping company lost 10,000 servers to NotPetya overnight. And they move actually almost 40% of the world's goods that go on containers. And they've got ships with 20,000 containers on them. And they don't know who those containers belong to, where they're supposed to go, what the customs paperwork is. That's 40% of the world's goods that are transported by boat. So to say that ransomware can't have a big effect is not quite true. Now, when you start to look at the absolute numbers, it is kind of scary. So this is from the Cloud Security Alliance, and they refer to this as their treacherous 12. So these are the things that you're most likely to get hit with. And when you look at this notion of ransomware attacks, of those surveyed, and this was a global survey, 62% said they get hit with ransomware. 35% suffer daily, weekly, or monthly attacks. So this is quite a big problem. Now, what's actually shifted is that the notion of defending against this is not really possible. You have to both defend and have some remediation tactics to fall back on. And this is where it gets kind of scary, right? So this is Gartner for IT Leaders Toolkit. So what they do is they track the organisation's risk tolerance policy. So this is actually a suggested tool for CIOs to talk to the board to show them where risks lie. And it's meant for other things, and it does kind of mention manufacturing there, but if you just swap manufacturing out and whatever your product or services is replace that. Now, where we are with ransomware, it's probably down here, individual users get hit. You know what, it's not very nice for them, but as an organisation, you're not going to get hurt particularly too much. Unless it's the CEO, and he's going to be really annoyed and probably some valuable stuff gone there. But normally, you're looking in this high risk is rare or it's unlikely, and the impact is low. The problem with the ransomware now and this notion of spear phishing, the social engineering that gets you there, is it's shifting the risk further up and over to the right, to the point where, if you were that shipping giant that, got put out, lost 10,000 servers overnight, actually you're almost in one of these probable and the risk being severe, to say the least. So there's some really not nice things going on in these areas. And this gentleman from Gartner, again, he's suggesting that we're going to move away from just trying to defend to detect and remediate instead. It's really quite important. And of course that leads on to recovery systems and not just security. And what we're starting to see now is a lot of overlap and convergence in these areas. So whilst most pieces of IT are actually trying to build out overlap, get rid of it because that has a cost, the one area where it's desirable is on the security side of things. When you have defense in depth, the more things that you've got that can potentially catch these kind of malware events, the better off you are. And finally, the most cheery one of the group, maybe pestilence, so that's not so good either, is it really, is death. And what we're really referring to here is outages. Outage, what does that mean? Now, some things are pure services, where it's compute and doesn't rely on much data, but in most cases, it's data that you're trying to get, and it's the value piece. And things like complexity cause a problem here. So once again, some of our customers, those who don't know, Commvault known mostly for backup and recovery. And we had some customers that were hit last year, and they come to recover. Unfortunately, we've never had one of our customers lose the backup data, because that can happen too. With some of our competitors, I know it happened. But what happens is they have no Active Directory, they can't log on. They've got no, the networks are down, they have no internal comms. They don't even have a map of the servers, or their disaster recovery plan was kept digitally on systems that have just gone down. It's like, I've got nothing to start recovering from. So this domino effect can be really quite important. And then, you've got this notion of traditional approaches. So traditional backup and recovery doesn't work in the cloud. And guess what? Cloud systems, when they go down, they can take out like half a country or hit multinational areas. So this over-reliance on, I've talked to a lot of younger people who've just been dealing with the cloud, and they don't think that backup and recovery applies to the cloud, and of course it does. Because every single service provider will have a clause in their contract that says your data, your responsibility. So backup and recovery still has no replacement in the cloud in most cases. Unless you're paying for it on your contract, believe me, it's not happening. And then, of course, you've got this notion about these governance and so on. So, again, we talk to a lot of organisations, and they say, oh, can we protect data the same in the cloud as we do on premises? And it's like, no, because their technology doesn't apply or it doesn't work in the cloud. So it's like, okay, we're not doing that. And then there's this other thing where they think it's less secure in the cloud, when actually, most of the big cloud providers have better security teams than most private organisations could ever imagine to employ. So as long as their password hygiene and other things, that their own responsibility around security is good, you're better off in the cloud, right? Amazon, Microsoft, Google, they haven't been hit by ransomware, right? It's all private organisations that got hit. So this, the other thing is people think all the availability and resilience that's around now, it makes things better. Well, actually, now this is a really interesting article from IDC, and they say that 90% of organisations have a serious outage every 2 years. And this hits things like their reputation and so on. So outages are still a critical factor. In fact, I was reading an article, it's from a little while ago, but they were saying that you're more likely to lose data if you put it on an SSD than you are if you put it on an old magnetic disk, believe it or not. So even though we've gone to solid state, it's still not perfect in those ways. So, I'm overrunning a little bit, Chris, apologies.
That's all right.
But there are some ways to get around some of this stuff. So, first of all, start to get visibility of your data. If you don't understand your data, you can't control it, you can't control the costs, you can't control governance. Secondly, I go to so many places, I see people like CDOs being appointed, and then they don't give them a full mandate or ownership of all the data in the business. So they can't get at stuff, they don't have control over it, they don't have budgets. So those kind of things need to be fixed too. And really, you should look to consolidate where possible, as I've said before. Chris is going to talk about the SaaS side of things. And the other thing I would say is, governance is quite often seen as a roadblock. Some of the things that you can do from a governance standpoint can actually help you to innovate. So just to quickly run through this, I think you'll get a copy of these presentations anyway, so these few slides might be quite useful. But if you profile your data, you can find out where the risks are, where if you can find out where, credit card numbers, driver's license numbers, names, addresses, email, all those kind of things that can lead to really important data being compromised is really useful. And getting that map will also enable you to delete data so you get rid of the risk and you lower costs. And things like disaster recovery, cloud charges, and all those things get less. This is one of our customers, and they looked at a group of servers, 71,000 files, so not a lot, but look at the number of files in there that had highly sensitive data on. Now, this is they've defined what highly sensitive means. I don't know what it was, but to them, it was data that would give them a material risk if it was compromised. So once you've got that kind of information, you can then take it back to your businesses and start to ask them some serious questions, and that can help you get a mandate for your data. And now this is an area that's close to my heart, and a lot of you might think backup and recovery was something that was kind of sorted out 10 years ago and you can forget about it now. But what happens is companies get acquired, it's organic growth. Most organisations end up with half a dozen or a dozen or more recovery systems and packages and programs, and that starts to get expensive. And actually, it's harder to manage it from a compliance perspective. And, the way that we do it, and sorry, this is a little bit of an advert, we actually make our backup and archive pool, which is all one thing for us, into a data lake that you can use for compliance and also for data insights and business intelligence. And that means you're saving a ton of cash because backup is something you have to do anyway. And with us, it works in Office 365, in the cloud, as well as with your on-premises data. And all of these things then can start to allow you to reduce costs. So another thing our customers are doing a lot of, and Chris is going to touch on this if I give him some time, is things like doing disaster recovery away from your own premises in the cloud and that kind of stuff. Now, I'm not going to go through all this because it will take me too long, and I'm very conscious of Chris's time. But the final thing I want to just touch on is, if you think governance is a barrier to your organisations innovating and getting yourselves to a point where you're starting to use, artificial intelligence and so on as a business benefit, actually, if you think about it, if the things that you put in for the compliance search, that's going to be indexing and looking at all the data that you have. And with us, as I said, it's our backup repository that does this. That allows you to govern things better, so you can set automatic policies to archive data based on its content. It allows you to find it if you get right to be forgotten requests wherever it is. It profiles data on primary systems as well as what's in the backups. And then you can actually start to apply machine learning and AI and other technologies to that, which means that you get a lot of value, not just the insurance policy that backup gives you. So, by the way, if you're interested in this, there's a piece on Forbes, whatever you think of Forbes, it's not one of their writers, turning backups into a searchable data lake. It's kind of interesting. So with that, I'll hand over to Chris, who's going to give you some examples and tell you a little bit about GreenLake.
Very good. Thank you, Nigel.
Chris, I'm afraid you've only got 4 minutes.
4 minutes. Whistle stop tour.
I thought we had 45.
Till 3:40.
Okay.
Okay,
I'll
sorry.
make it really, really quick then. So I don't know if anyone's heard of GreenLake. Anybody's heard of GreenLake? Okay, so I'll cover what that is very, very briefly, and we'll just have a snapshot as to kind of why we are presenting both on stage. GreenLake is a way of us putting together hardware, software services, including obviously from HPE and our leading partner Commvault, into an investment that we would make on behalf of our accounts. We put that on site ahead of when you need it, and you pay for it only when you consume it. So that is the consumption model that we're talking about right here. So a little bit about our business. We've been around for about 8 years if you think about utility-ready storage, but in its current guise, we've been around for about 4.5 years really. When I first took on the job, we had revenues of about $60 million in the first year of that inception in its latest guise. Last year, we've got over $3 billion of assets on the books for TCV for our business unit. So a lot of growth there over time. It's been one of the fastest growing offers from HPE, and it allows us to work, invest, and help our customers to be agile, reduce risk, reduce time in the consumption of infrastructure and solutions. I hope that makes sense. So if you think about this statement, this is, fairly obvious. This is a statement which is quite kind of clear cut really. It's kind of obvious and straightforward. But if you think about really what that means, and there is a link to an electric vehicle and what we're doing in that particular market, if you think about how car manufacturers have been plunged into this race around electric vehicles, if you think about it in those terms, the speed at which they need to move has been kind of unparalleled there. So we're helping a couple of German automotive companies to be able to go really fast within that space, but also to be really efficient with their investments too. This is a key slide. When I show this slide to customers around the world, and my team does, it's really good in that everyone has something to say about this slide. Where are you on this spectrum of things, really? And what we were kind of seeing, I guess I kind of see the market about there, really, but traditionally, companies look at big investments, they look at big capital investments, look at multi-year commitments, they look at depreciating the assets over time, and really what they want to do, customers tell us they want to start really small, they want to get real-time insights into what's going on, they want to be able to fail fast, and they're doing this against a backdrop of business uncertainty, as we just highlighted really around the electric vehicles challenge and how quickly that came into the market. As an example, every business has their own example, right? If you think about banking, what's going on there, logistics, the way that those businesses are transforming. So our customers tell us they want to get to the right-hand side of that spectrum, okay? So if you think about the traditional route, your usage curve might look something like this over time. No nice straight line, ups, downs, peaks, troughs, but it's a difficult thing to try and guess and to try and understand. You'll put some workloads out into public cloud. You'll have this dynamic where you're not quite sure about what's going to happen. You'll have big chunky capital investments. The problem with that is that you're not using all of those assets and resources from day one. It's a cost. It's not a great use of investment funds. And if you miss out, and this is the real killer, if the business doesn't have capacity when they need it, it slows them down. So you get the turning of the oil tanker analogy where you make the business effectively slower than it should be. So with our offer, we are putting capacity ahead of time and services and software from our leading partners, and it's just pulled down. It's a contract, services contract, so you've got all the assets there ahead of when you need them, you can pull them down, that supply chain is just killed. So that is what our customers really want from us. They want us to invest in them and make that really, really fast. As you can see, all these partners, and that's just a snapshot, it takes us a couple of months. If we can bill it and meter it and provide the right appropriate services around it, we can get it into our model itself. So that part is really, really fast. We had a gut feeling that most enterprises had assets in their data centers that were not fully utilized. And the figures are quite astonishing, really. So they've paid for 100%, they're only using 59% for compute, 48% for storage. So not a great return on the investments there. So just a quick snapshot on some of the customers. If you think about ABB, great customer of ours, and they are offering this electric vehicle charging point as a service out to the market now. They're using this for car companies, bus companies, where you've got a bus which is electric, it stops to let people on and off, it charges as it does so. So it's all the data, all the management around that. And they're using GreenLake to actually host and facilitate this as a very good, efficient investment that will grow and scale as they need it to. If you think about the next one, Ukes Net-a-Porter, I don't know if any of you guys have heard of this, but about 10 years ago they were selling clothes out of their bedroom in London, and now they are a publicly traded company growing really, really quick. They were the first company, they do everything on their app. They don't even really have a website it's all driven on the app. They were the first company to sell a €100,000 watch on an app. So if you think about that supply chain, I don't know who these people are that are buying €100,000 watches, but it's not me. But if you think about, no investment in real estate, that supply chain, that's a very profitable supply chain for these guys. And they're doing all kinds of new services into the market. They'll have a service where if you're a high-value customer, the delivery driver will come to the door, you will try on the clothes, the delivery driver waits for you, and if you don't like something, you can literally hand it back. So really high levels of service. If you're ordering 5 items, 4 might be in stock, They'll pull one over from China. You won't even know. It will just arrive for you. Very innovative company, and they're real market leaders, and they're driving everything on GreenLake. E&I, this is a really great example of how they didn't want a huge capital investment here, and they wanted to be able to take a snapshot and understand basic business questions. Is this oil field going to be profitable for us? What does this look like? Should we go after it? Great, great example of GreenLake in action there.
Sorry, I'm going to
No
I
problem.
understand,
So it's
yeah.
just about this time that I'm going to hand back to Nigel.
Yeah,
so
no,
there's a
it
good
was-
timing there.
yeah, we
I
kinda
could have
done
talked for. I'll get really passionate about this stuff. I could have
Yeah.
talked for ages, but I've got to hand it back now to Nigel. So
No,
thank you.
it's really the point was, get your data under control. If you do that, then there's a lot of things that you can do to avoid some of the risks that are still growing, not getting easier. And finally, just like Chris has just shown, whether you're traditional or modern business, you've got to think differently about data these days and what you do with it. We're going to be upstairs anyway, so if you've got any questions around data management, how you think some of these things could help from either Convolt or the delivery mechanism through Chris's GreenLake service, then please come and see us.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you very much.